And it's time for the Freelance Report. Gianna Volpe, brought to you by Maximus Health and Fitness, 130 East Main Street, Riverhead, and by Michelangelo's of Mattituck in the Mattituck Plaza Shopping Center on Route 25 in Mattituck. Good morning, Miss Volpe.
Good morning. Very excited for a very special report. This is going to be almost in its entirety the interview that I did with Guardian Angels founder Curtis Sliwa in West Hampton last week at the Beach Bakery Cafe. We may even have enough for some next week.
You know, he is first of all, Curtis Sliwa is New York. He's like, he epitomizes
as
what
New York as
is.
It gets. Yeah.
He is, but the other part about it is he's quite passionate about the Guardian Angels thing. Yeah.
I mean, he started it. And we're going, in the first segment, we're going to hear really the story of how the Guardian Angels, and actually the predecessor, the Magnificent 13, came to be back in the 70s. Well, first of all, this interview is a long time coming for me.
Okay.
I've known about you guys since I was Anthony's age.
Oh, boy.
You know, growing up on the Palisades across the river from the city.
Palisades Park swings all day and after dark.
Yes, but it's not there anymore.
Koreatown.
And I remember how dangerous it was back then. I mean, that was back, you know, like around 92 when you had your murder attempt, and what a scary thing to happen.
Well, right across from you is Washington Heights, which was the crack capital of the world.
I'm curious.
That's where they invented crack.
I'm curious if you had a moment, even before then, or around then, where you really felt, you know, either with the Angels or with the Magnificent 13, where you felt like, wow, we really are making a difference in New York. If so, tell us about it. And I mean, I'd have to assume that when something like that happens, when the Gotti family is taking notice of you, you have to feel like something, like you're making some sort of impact.
Sure. Well, with the Magnificent 13, when I started back in 1979, I was a night manager of Mickey D's McDonald's. And it was just complete hopelessness and despair. Out of all the boroughs that were fading, the Bronx was fading the fastest. Burning buildings, people abandoning neighborhoods, and the gangs basically ruling whole sections of that borough. And my attitude was, I got nothing to lose here. I'm single. It's not like I have any great equity. I have to come in from Brooklyn, which had been renamed Crooklyn.
Oh, all right.
On a train called the number 4 train, which was now named the Muggers Express by the riders, or the number 2 train, the Beast. So all the trains had nicknames because of the severity of the crime problem. And I had a series of volunteer awards for organizing young people. First to recycle garbage back in Canarsie, where I was living before it was even fashionable, before there was Earth Day or even the concept of recycling or the environmental movement. And then in cleanups in the Bronx when I was a night manager.
That came like in 95, 96, around then.
Right. But I was well ahead of the curve.
Right.
But all of those volunteer programs were safe. Antiseptic, all-American, you know, everybody supported those. But my interest was the human garbage that was polluting everyone's life. I mean, making them miserable. So even if...
What were some of the moments, what are some of the things you saw as a manager at McDonald's that sort of tug at your heartstrings?
Well, you always personalize things because you can view things from a third party, and as bad as they are, they don't impact the way they do when somebody puts a sawed-off shotgun to your head and you're sitting in the manager's chair, and now brain don't fail me now or freeze up because now I got to turn these tumblers.
Right.
How many?
Did that happen to you?
Oh, yeah, 4 times.
So, and what, those were robberies?
Those were robberies that took place at the end of the night, and this McDonald's was a little different than others because it was only one way in, one way out, and you had to get the garbage out at night. And we did a lot of volume, and it was a lot of garbage. And that's generally when gangs or drug fiends, dope fiends would take advantage and bum rush us and try to pull an armed robbery, or at the very end when we were leaving. So it was always difficult. And then my responsibility was also to make a night depository drop in the bank across the street, sort of in the side opening in which you put it in so that it drops into the bank so that they can process it in the morning so you don't have it in the store in case there's another robbery.
Right. And you were successful in, did you guys get robbed or like how did you do it?
Well, out of 4 times, 2 of them were very successful because they got the jump on me and the crew. The other 2 we were able to thwart simply because they were the gang.
How do you do that?
Well, the gang that couldn't shoot straight. They were just incompetents, dysfunctional. You know, dope fiends. They're not highly organized.
Right.
But they're very dangerous because the sawed-off shotgun has a hair trigger. So even if they touch the trigger, there's a good chance that they're going to, discharge the gun, and those pellets are going to do a lot of damage depending on how close they are to you. In one instance, they locked me and my crew up in the freezer and kept the freezer on. They didn't even turn the freezer off.
Wow.
So we were like fudge popsicles an hour later when the maintenance guy came in, and then he let us out. But that was common in the Bronx. So my experience wasn't different than a lot of other business people or residents or homeowners.
How did that lead to the formation of the Magnificent 13?
Well, between that and then just having to ride the trains back to Brooklyn, where I was living, which had been renamed Crooklyn.
Was it sort of like a defense mechanism in a way?
Well, at that time, because people were very feckless and weak and they didn't fight back and they were basically herd away from someone who was in trouble as opposed to herd towards them and help them.
Right.
I'd be riding the train back dressed in my Mickey D's jacket, with the M stamped all over my body. And I would purposefully sit in the last car of the train, which was considered the party car. It was always graffitied up. There were always people back there smoking J's and drinking 40s and carousing. And in many instances, all they were trying to do was intimidate you because they would get a vicarious thrill, sort of like Clockwork Orange.
Yeah.
They would really get off on it. But other times, they would look at me and they would think like, wow, an ATM machine, and I got the PIN numbers right on my knuckle. And they would come in and they would swoop in and they would try to take me off. And it was at that point that I realized, hey, this is wrong. I should be able to sit wherever I want to in this train. I just had a hard day's work, 10, 12 hours, and I hated every second of it. And Mickey D's, although it was great preparation to organize the Guardian Angels. But I was not going to put up with that. And people would live vicariously at that time through vigilante movies. Bronson and Death Wish, Beautiful Pusher and Walking Tall, De Niro and Taxi Driver. So they go in the theater and kill him. Then they'd come out of the theater and they'd be all nebbishy and schlubby and, don't hurt me.
Right.
My attitude was, hey, I fornicate you mad dog me. I'm going to hit you before you hit me. And oftentimes, people didn't expect that from a guy who was suited down, in a Mickey D's jacket with the tie, the corporate look. So it came as quite the shock. And I started transitioning and thinking, what can I do, since I'm a good organizer, to be able to organize young people to patrol the trains, which where was needed most, and help people, particularly in the swing shift and the graveyard shifts, 4 to 11 and 11 to 6 in the morning, when working class people were getting clobbered.
Yeah.
And I remember oftentimes they would come onto the train and they would have their own personal guardian angel, so to speak, a weapon.
How are the trains these days? Because I remember, let's see, it was probably 2004 or 5, only time I rode the train at night. And it was definitely not something that I'll ever do again.
The trains now, the problem is the quality of life sucks.
Oh, gosh, I can't imagine what happened after the recession.
Well, the MTA, the money-taking agency, They like to take your money and deliver no service. They claim they've had a ridership increase, which they have. So you would think there's more schedule, more coin to run the operation.
Right.
But they're deadbeats and slackers. The trains themselves are dirty and filthy. There are homeless people everywhere. The smell, they attack your senses. Just the smells of the subway.
Right.
Their on-time performance is dismal. And just like the Long Island Railroad, you try to hear the conductor announce the coming trains or whatever.
And unless you actually have an angel, and unless you actually have the guardian angel presence there, I mean, the average Joe is not much different than...
Yeah, so the problem of the trains is there's been an uptick in crime, but not a severe uptick. We're not talking murders and rapes and stabbings and shootings. But the quality of life is so dismal that will lead to a further increase, because criminals will then see that there is tolerance for whatever it is they want to do.
Whatever behavior. And I mean, what about the LIRR? Are you seeing any problems like that, or is it's generally
No, I see the LIRR the same. Metro North is a much better run railroad, and they carry just about as many passengers. Westchester better than Connecticut. But the Long Island Railroad is the pits. The late night run, coming from the Trendoid Hamptons with all the hipsters, the drunk hipsters, paying like outrageous amounts of money for their Pabst Blue Ribbon and Rolling Rock. Rolling Rock, I used to get a case of it for $4. Now these schmucks, they buy one bottle for $4 and they're off their bird, they're screaming, they're cursing on the train. The conductors are doing nothing. There's no MTA cops. They're urinating. They're trying to urinate in a Rolling Rock bottle. Last week I had to come.
Really?
Yeah, I had to come get my son and bring him back to the city because my former wife, his mother, was staying out here in Sag Harbor. And I got to tell you, I had to put at least half a dozen of these hipsters in line.
Wow.
Conductors wouldn't do it. And then I asked the conductors, what gives here? Why are you turning over the train to this drunken, rowdy mob? And they said, well, we don't get paid to do that.
That's really interesting, because it's sort of, it's a little bit different of like a socioeconomic group than maybe you're used to.
These are generally well-to-do, trust fund babies who, after they've been ginned up a bit, they get all wild and crazy and they get all full of themselves. And you're saying to yourself, wait a second, in Jamaica, which is the central station, they have an MTA police precinct. You never see the police on the trains. They're all gathered around in Jamaica Station having a cup of coffee.
So the way that you see it, this is sort of a problem that's brewing, that's actually advancing because of the fact that these are not generally kids that...
Yeah, well, I'll give you an example. Just imagine you were half in the bag, and instead of getting off at West Hampton, you got off at Mastic Shirley. Get ready for fright night. You're going to have an X-Lax attack. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get molested or robbed, but let me tell you, there are folks there hanging out, and you're wondering, like, why are you hanging out? The trains have already passed. What are you waiting for? And they're obviously waiting for some slim pickings. And there are a number of other stations in which it's dark, it's dank. You notice there are no security measures.
Right, at all.
There are no cameras. And you're wondering, what is this money-taking agency doing with all this schiarol, this money? And they're deadbeats. They're slackers. The members of the board who are appointed by the governor, most are by the governor, some by the mayor. They do absolutely jack diddly squat nothing. They don't ride the system. They don't even understand how the system operates.
Oh.
And that's the first segment.
That's the first segment. So next we kind of take it back to Riverhead and back to the East End. But yeah, got to talking a little bit about the coin there. Jerry Steiner would like that.
And the Hamptons.
Yes, which
the trust fund babies. And there was a whole big thing, and then we'll have to break because I don't want to cut anything off. There was a whole big thing. The East Hampton Town Board had their work session at the Montauk Firehouse on Tuesday. And like 100 people showed up from Montauk to complain about the fact that Montauk has become Party Central USA.
Right. Yeah, and that's really it's a common thing.
And the police chief all but said, we just can't do this all through enforcement. Well, why not?
Right.
Am I seeing something wrong here?
You know, and people do. They drink quite a bit and party quite a bit on the train, and it gets pretty raucous.
So by the time they get out to Montauk, they're pretty tuned up.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And turning up. All right, so when we get back, more from Curtis Sliwa of the Guardian Angels.
Back on the Freelance Report, brought to you by Maximus Health and Fitness, 130 East Main Street, Riverhead, and by Michelangelo's at Mattituck in the Mattituck Plaza Shopping Center on Main Road in Mattituck. Gianna Volpe.
Yes, welcome back. And this is this part 2 of the Curtis Sliwa interview. We start getting into the East End and how the Guardian Angels came here. How did the Angels' efforts evolve out here on the East End? And what has it been like on Railroad Avenue in Riverhead? I saw you guys out in Greenport a couple months ago.
Yep.
Actually, the first time I ever saw the Angels in real life. 4 or 5 guys walking down the street, Front Street in Greenport. Tell us how it all happened. And
Well, actually, it's very unique because it's an unlikely partnership that made this happen. Dave Capel was the mayor of Greenport at the time.
Yeah.
He's also the head of the American Civil Liberties Union and the East End of Long Island. But he was at wit's end. He no longer had his own police department. They discontinued it. So
Okay.
now Southold had the responsibility of patrolling now the village of Greenport.
This was the year that they turned over? What year was that?
Early 2000, I think.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure of the dates.
In the early millennium.
But he was having a problem in the 3rd Street Park. A number of young black males who were openly dealing drugs. And, you know, people from nearby areas were driving in and driving out and having a good old time because the drugs were good and plentiful. But the thuggery that surrounded them was menacing. So the people of Greenport, you know, they're going for their ice cream cone, their little tchotchkes, they're walking the carousel right near the waterfront. They're like freaked out of their
in
minds.
high summer.
Well, because it would be fights and disputes, and sometimes, like in any drug dealing operation, you get sold beat drugs.
Right.
And now the customer comes back, wants to start an argument and a fight. So out of total desperation, Dave Capel called me in New York and said, hey, would you be willing to come out here and look at the possibility of setting up a Guardian Angel chapter? I said, no problem. I said, but we're going to need somebody to lead the effort. He goes, well, I don't know who that person might be. I said, well, guess what, buddy? You may consider yourself. Most times I say that, I never hear back from them again. They introduced me to Mr. Click on the telephone. But Dave Capel, to his credit, not only went through the training, he became a Guardian Angel and became the leader of the Guardian Angels.
Wow.
We would send out a coordinator from New York City to do the heavy lifting, you know, the rough stuff. But the local group patrolled for 2 years. We eradicated the drug problem in that 3rd Street Park. And people remembered what a tremendous difference it was. So when all of a sudden recently this Latino gang problem in the entire East End began firing up Huntington Station, Riverhead, Greenport, and all throughout.
MS-13, another...
MS-13 and 18th Street. So MS-13 to Salvadorians and 18th Street to Mexicans and their disputes. Well, residents of Greenport who had a good experience with the Guardian Angels and with the Southold police, you know, acting stunad, like there is no gang problem. Well, look, you see the MS-13 tags right on the wall. What do you think that is, that graffiti? They're tagging
What do you
their
think
area.
that's about? And what is it like? I imagine that wherever you do go, there's got to be some kind of pushback from local police. Is it just, you know, it makes them feel like they're not doing a good enough job? Like, what is...
Well, here, it's simple. It has really, it's not even that parochial. Because originally when we came into Greenport, I remember the first merchant meeting I attended at the mayor's invitation, Dave Capel, and some of the merchants said, Mr. Mayor, inviting the Guardian Angels in is the equivalent of yelling shark on the beach in the middle of the summer. So, oh man, how melodramatic. Give this guy an Academy Award. So they don't really know much about the Guardian Angels, and that's understood. But they know less about their Latino community. And one thing I may be considered as an expert. And it's interesting with all this Trump controversy because he is to the extreme of thinking every illegal is a criminal. But there are others who act like we should be a sanctuary and invite every illegal in, not realizing that you got some guys walking in with tats on their neck.
So what is your advice? I mean, how do you better understand the Latin community?
Well, you go into that community and you recruit them. Now, because they are, in many instances, illegal, or as some people call them, undocumented, the impression is, oh, but they operate in the shadows. They're never going to get involved, and plus they'll be intimidated. You know, there'll be threats and retribution and revenge against them internally by these gangbangers. They'll never get involved. And I say, that's the whole concept of America, self-help. They're here to stay. You're not going to do what Romney wanted, self-deportation. You're not going to get what Trump wants, you know, build the Great Wall of Monterey, you know, between TJ, Tijuana, San Diego, and Corpus Christi. It ain't going to happen. So the reality is, if they're here, and we know they're working hard, and many of them are working jobs that most Americans won't do, then they must self-police. They must take responsibility for their community, and we must teach them to drop down, to trust police, because from the communities they're from, in Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, of which I've been in many of those places, you can't trust the police. In fact, if you were to say to them, you got a problem, why don't you call the police? They say, are you local? Are you crazy? All they'll want is bribes from me. They'll shake me down. They'll be looking at my house to see what they can take in terms of what we think of police in America, where they're there to help.
Getting back to cooperation with local police and whatnot, though, I guess what you're saying to me is that the Guardian Angels like to work in conjunction with the police, and is that...
Well, we can do either or. We'll be your partner, but if you basically say, you know, Guardian Angels need not apply, we don't need you, we don't want you, we don't have a reason for you to exist, we can operate independently and autonomously.
Okay.
So
how do you train angels as far as that's concerned when it comes to dealing with police, arriving maybe at a situation, or they're together? How do you train the angels to deal with that?
It's interesting because we normally don't have problems with the line officers, the men or the women who actually do the patrols. It's normally the bureaucrats, the administrators, what we call the white shirts, the suits, because they're offended that anyone would even suggest that they and they alone can't deal with the problem. As opposed to like in Riverhead, where the town supervisor, Sean Walter, said, hey, these are experts in dealing with the Latino community. We are not. We need to work in partnership with them. And he got blowback from his PBA, from his police, many of whom don't speak Spanish. And as I explained to some that I spoke at, it wouldn't matter if you spoke Spanish. They don't trust the uniform. Where they come from is an aversion to deal with cops. You're not going to suddenly get them to be able to sort of transform themselves. Now, their children will, their grandchildren will, as they acclimate to America. But the first immigrants, whether they're legal or illegal, they're not. So those are old brain cells. But Angel Guardianes, they're familiar with, particularly in Mexico, where we have Guardian Angels. And our leader there is considered like the Hulk Hogan of Mexico in wrestling, luchador. His name is Vampiro. So that has given us a tremendous benefit in already them having a consciousness about them. They're not as familiar with us in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, but they're somewhat.
Right.
And because they see their own dressed as Guardian Angels, some of whom are illegal, it's like, wow, this can't be too bad. I know Julio over there. I know Agnes over there. And so they kick the lingo, and they realize we're focusing on their community, which is very insular, very parochial. You as a white person, someone else is a black person, someone is a Puerto Rican or a Dominican, would not at all ever have a problem with them, because the gangbangers know, stay within your own. The moment you venture outside is when the long arm of the law is going to come and really crack down on you.
So tell me, let's talk about the scope of what's going on, of your efforts in Riverhead. You know, what's going on there, and what have you seen so far?
Well, in Huntington Station, where we started with the Latino gang problem, and then Greenport, and now Riverhead, it's threefold. One is we do outreach into the Latino community because many of our members are from their community.
How many members do you have in Riverhead right now?
Riverhead, we're just in the midst of recruiting. We have about 4, 6 recruits, but we don't know if they're going to get through the process of training and graduating.
How do you choose recruits, and how long does it take?
Well, what we do is we aggressively recruit. We go into the cantinas. These are mostly young men who are here. There aren't enough women. Most of the women are back in their country of origin. And so you have that many young men with high levels of testosterone and nothing to do when they're not working and drinking cerveza. That's a chemical cocktail for trouble. And particularly if they have gang affiliations. Most don't, but some do. So let's say on a Friday, Saturday night, they're exhausted. They've worked a 6-day week. But all of a sudden, you know, they're sparking up anger at what 18th Street did, or MS-13 crossed off 18th Street graffiti, or on the job, MS-13 guy dissed an 18th Street guy, and then there's fights. And what a lot of people don't know.
Do they have that presence in Riverhead?
Yeah, because I actually talk to employers, and I explain to them, these Latino gangs are unlike white and black gangs. They are highly disciplined, highly regimented. They are paramilitary organizations. They run like the Guardian Angels. They're not run like white and black gangbangers, you know, go to sleep at 4 in the morning, and they wake up at 4 in the afternoon, they sell some drugs, they chase some trim, you know, they bend their elbow.
It's more 24/7?
Well, no, but there's a method to their regimen. So, for instance, a guy from MS-13 is told by his shot caller, his general, you're going to show up for day labor, and you're going to get hired on that crew at 5 in the morning, and you're going to go work the vineyards, and you're going to be the best employee that boss has, or that work hand has, and generally they are. And so when everyone gets paid at the end of the week and cash in the envelope, then all of a sudden there's a vig that each of the workers has to kick in to MS-13. It's like organized crime used to control the labor unions. It's the same thing. And they do it brilliantly because normally it's a gringo, a white owner, sometimes a female owner who's oblivious to what's happening. Because naturally the workers, they don't complain.
And these are the standout guy to whoever the white guy is in charge. That's the guy whose name he knows.
Right, and normally you would think the gangbanger with the tats would be your worst worker, would be looking to take advantage, steal from you. In this case, oh no, they're your stellar employee because there's a method to why they're there, and that is to get that 5% of each of the workers' paychecks at the end of the week.
So that's what we got for this week.
I can't wait till next week's stuff. This is really, it's fascinating.
I mean, I didn't know any of that stuff about the way that, you know, gangs like MS-13 or 18th Street work as far as labor in places like vineyards.
Well, it happened in this country in the early 1900s, the Italians, the Black Hand.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what you saw in the movie The Godfather Part 2?
Yeah.
Fanucci, Wet My Beak? That's where it comes from. Same song, different singer.
So next week we'll hear a little bit more about the efforts on Railroad Avenue, and yeah, that's what I got.
WRIV local news headlines you can trust. The Democratic candidate for Riverhead supervisor helped the current supervisor develop town budgets. Southampton Town may appeal a judge's ruling on an e-roof, and another body part from an animal is found in Suffolk.